at the time that he was knocked down to the ground, the individual officer didn't even know he had a weapon. And so for the administration to say that it's justified to be the individual is justified to be shot just because he was carrying a concealed weapon is ludicrous, plainly against the Second Amendment and against the Republican platform.
President Trump is hinting he might want to ease tensions in Minnesota. He has said he wants to de-escalate the operation there a bit. What does that mean? There is a public backlash, and it's growing after the shooting of Alex Peretti by ICE officers last weekend. The president spoke to Fox News earlier.
We took thousands of hardened criminals out of Minnesota, so they had good crime numbers, believe it or not. You know, we have Tom Homan there now. We put him in there. He's great. And they met with the governor, the mayor, everybody else, and we're going to de-escalate a little bit. These are paid insurrectionists. These are paid agitators. These people aren't normal, like, oh, gee, that, you know, they're incensed about anything. How do you get incensed when you go into a state and you're taking criminals out? You're taking monsters out.
President Trump there, but with opinions and positions so deeply entrenched between the Trump administration in Washington and the state and local authorities on different sides of the line, can justice be served? Harold Krent is a former dean of the Chicago-Kent College of Law. Hello to you, Harold.
I'm fine, thank you.
Good to have you here. Do you judge the Trump administration is softening its hard line on immigration enforcement or the use of ICE federal agents for these mass arrests?
I think they've taken a second look, and there's at least some mildly encouraging news that they may not be as confrontational and may not be as free with violence in these demonstrations. Obviously, anytime there's some kind of standoff between protesters and police, anything can cause some kind of shooting. But these ill-trained officers have been so quick to shoot the rifles, shoot their guns, and the administration has stopped them. But now they may be backing off a little bit. So right. These have been tragedies, but maybe we'll see a better future.
So are there now something closer to conventional investigations taking place here? Because after the shooting of Renee Good, there was, straight away a FBI investigation, wasn't there? That's in line with protocol. But it quickly changed extraordinarily into an investigation into Renee Good's partner. Is there a contrast here?
Yeah, so I think what we have to look for is the state to do the investigation. The individuals who fired the shots for both of Alex Peretti and Renee Good can be subject to prosecution under state law for murder. I mean, they're not easy, but if they can be pursued. Also, the estates of both individuals can sue the federal government for the intentional tort for being shot. Those take time, but there are some possibilities.
Yes. I mean, we saw after the shooting of Renee Good just a few days ago that local police, the state authorities were blocked. They were impeded from, initially even getting to the scene of what had happened. And that is different now, slightly different now, isn't it?
Yeah, and the judges opened up their ability to maintain evidence and preserve evidence so that they can be used in a rigorous state investigation. So there is at least some avenues of imperfect justice way after the fact, in these cases. And I hope that the wheels of the justice machinery keep rolling. And it's important to take into account what these ICE officers or Border Patrol officers have done. Right.
Now, after the Peretti shooting, it was Stephen Miller, the enormously controversial advisor, close advisor to President Trump, who said that ICE officers have immunity. Is that true? Do they have immunity?
It's absolutely false. And there have been a number of cases in our history where states have prosecuted individuals. Now, the federal government can defend and say that the federal officers were engaged in a federal mission at the time of the arrest or at the time of the incident. But there's still another factor, is that they have to show that the defendants here, the officers, acted with reasonable necessity in undertaking the action. And that's a kind of a squishy word, reasonable necessity. So it'll be up for the courts to decide that. But they have on past occasions decided that the federal officers acted improvidently outside their mission, and the state prosecution has stuck. So we'll have to see if that happens in these cases too.
Right. For an officer responsible for a shooting to become a defendant, there would need to be charges. There need to be, as it were, locally pursued charges. I've heard it suggested that even if that were to happen, obviously that's a big if, the case could somehow be moved to a federal court with a federal judge, and the relevant officer could claim immunity there. Is that true?
It is true, but it's subject to this kind of middle sort of test about even if the individual was engaged in a federal mission, which presumably he was his actions consistent with reasonable necessity for undertaking that federal offense? And here, the individual, as we know so far, we don't want to judge the facts, but from what we've seen, he was already on the ground, he was disabled, he was posing no threat to anyone, and when he was shot in the back. So again, there is a shocking lack of symmetry between the federal mission and the shooting in this case. So that's what would have to be decided. And to note, even though this will be removed to federal court, it's still the same jury pool as would be existing in a state prosecution. So it'll be Minnesota jurors deciding on the fate of the ICE officer.
I guess it needs to be said, Harold, that of course there is the power of presidential pardon. And the president has been very, very free with his pardons during his second term so far. We're just a year in, and the pattern suggests that the idea of a pardon to shield an officer in any kind of legal jeopardy is more than possible.
Oh, absolutely, you're right. And the pardon could come even before the trial. And in fact, if I were a presidential Trump advisor, which I'm clearly not, I would suggest that you don't want to have something on the record about this case. It would be better to issue a presidential pardon. I have no idea if he'll do that or not, but you're absolutely right that would take this issue away from the courts.
Well, now, this is a big issue in your country, in America, because it is the Second Amendment to the Constitution, isn't it? The right to bear arms, which is a sacred right to so many Americans. Now, after these shootings, we're hearing members of the administration saying, look, you're putting yourself in jeopardy if you're carrying a weapon anywhere near the scene of a police operation. Now, there are many people in America who have the right to bear a concealed weapon. It just takes a certificate, and failure to carry one is just a low-level offence. So this debate, what implications does that have for in the eyes of so many Americans, the right to bear arms?
Yeah, so the administration clearly overstepped, and they justified the shooting initially because Alex Purdy was armed. And that is a right protected under the Second Amendment, as you've mentioned. Minnesota is among the half of the states in the United States where you can have a concealed carry law and carry a gun. But the issue was he wasn't brandishing it. It was hidden. So at the time that he was knocked down to the ground, the individual officer didn't even know he had a weapon. And so for the administration to say that it's justified to the individual is justified to be shot just because he was carrying a concealed weapon is ludicrous, plainly against the Second Amendment and against the Republican platform. So they've obviously lost a little support or credibility with the initial justification of this shooting.
Well, and that does get you finally and briefly into sensitive political territory, because anything that looks like a challenge to the right to bear arms, which is a right that's cherished by millions of Americans, that's going to upset a lot of people who are natural supporters of President Trump and natural Republicans. I see the National Rifle Association, a really powerful lobby group, have things to say about this.
Well, absolutely right. I mean, this was a kind of impolitic and tragic reaction to the tragedy itself, right? Because they've made it much more difficult for themselves politically, which is why we start with the idea that I think the administration is pulling back. They removed the head of operations in Minnesota and it was replaced by a different individual within the Trump administration. And that's a recognition that things weren't going well. And I think the big problem here is these officers are trained so poorly and not given the basic kinds of counseling and practice that we need to have individuals trying to enforce the law, whether it's in our country or yours.